Welcome to Spiral Dynamics Stage Purple. This is a continuation of my multi-part series on the developmental model known as spiral dynamics. I have many episodes in this series. In a sense, this is the end of the series, but also the beginning, because Stage Purple is really the beginning of where you want to start with spiral dynamics, and then everything else goes up from there. Now, before we get into that, I want to give credit here to the developers of this model, Claire Graves, Don Beck, and Christopher Cohen, and also the website spiraldynamicsintegral.nl. A lot of the phrases and information that you'll find in this episode, I pulled directly from the website, or I pulled directly from the book called Spiral Dynamics, or from the work of Claire Graves, who was the originator of the spiral dynamics model before it was even called spiral dynamics. It was a series of value systems. So spiral dynamics, again, just to recap, for those of you who are just joining in, if this is the first episode you're watching, it's a developmental model that looks at the evolution of culture and human psychology through time, both at an individual level and also collectively. And a lot of it is about collective evolution, because culture is sort of a collective human invention. So every stage is a more advanced form of culture. No one stage is better than any other stage, but they do come in a particular order, and generally you don't skip stages. You have to go through each stage to get to the next stage. This model is extremely useful for understanding your own development throughout your life, the development of those around you, your family members, your friends, your coworkers, and then also the development of your society. And the real value of this model is that you're able to take all of the crazy cultural stuff that's happening around you and make sense of it, because really what you start to see is when you look at culture and you strip it of all of its superficiality, you get down to the root of culture. And what that's about is about a certain level of the psyche, a certain level of cognitive development of the psyche, a certain level of moral development, and really a set of values. So each stage corresponds with a set of values. Here we go. I'll show you again the chart of the various stages. Purple is the beginning of the spiral, we might say. There's one below called beige, but it's not really pertinent to us here in our work. So we're starting with purple. Then we go up to red, blue, orange, green, yellow, and turquoise. And as we're going up this ladder of levels, as we might say, there's an increase in the level of consciousness, an increase in the level of complexity to the culture and to one's psyche or to one's mind. And so generally what we try to do throughout life is we try to evolve up these stages, in a sense, as quickly as we can, trying to get to tier 2, which is yellow and turquoise. That's what we're trying to do personally, and that's kind of where our understanding of culture intersects with our own individual development. So you yourself, if you're joining Actualized.org in the effort to actualize yourself, to develop yourself, then you're probably joining me around stage orange, maybe green, maybe even blue. And then my job is to help to take you into high green, solid green, yellow, and to turquoise. And basically all of the content that I share with you is trying to get you to yellow and turquoise and to see reality from those higher elevation perspectives, higher stages of consciousness, more complex ways of looking at the world, more nuanced ways of looking at the world. Okay, so let's talk about the essence of Stage Purple. Stage Purple is about being a member of a tribe and a clan. In a sense, this is where mankind began. Mankind has lived this way for hundreds of thousands of years in a clannish, tribal sort of little community. It's about survival as a tribe. It's about sacrificing oneself for your own tribe, being an individual subordinated to the group. Today, because most of us, if you're listening to me, you're probably living in a relatively developed part of the world, maybe a Western democracy in Europe or in America or in Canada, something like that. And therefore, you're probably at spiral dynamic stage blue or above, probably around orange, maybe orange/green. And so at this level of development, our culture has so indoctrinated us with this notion of individuality, individual consumerism, individual property rights, my right to have a house, my right to have, my wife, my right to have my children, my right to have my car. We're living in a very materialistic, individualistic age and culture, we might say. All the culture that comes out of Hollywood and so forth that is now spread all around the world. If you're watching movies and TV shows and all of this, it's all very individualistic minded. And it can create a sort of a false notion that this is how mankind has always been. We've always just thought of ourselves as individuals surviving. There's this kind of this libertarian myth that I've talked about in my episode about why libertarianism is nonsense. This sort of myth of the rugged individual, the sort of John Wayne character who survives by himself, is self-reliant, and if anybody messes with him, he's got his gun and he defends his right and his property and his family and his wife and this sort of mentality. But this is not how the majority of mankind lives, not even to this day, but certainly not for the majority of human history. The majority of human history was communal life. You lived as part of a tribe. When you're living as part of a tribe, there is not this sense that I have an individual right to a piece of land and to a house and to a gun and to whatever. You're part of a tribe. And in fact, your larger identity, see, this is all a function of identity. And we talk about identity a lot in my teachings because identity is the crux of all development. And really everything that goes on with humans is all about identity. So here we're talking about a very collectivist identity. And you need to start to wrap your mind around the idea that having an individual identity is something that's relatively modern. It's maybe a couple hundred years old, maybe 1,000 years old, depending on which parts of the world we're looking at. But even today, I would say probably half the world lives in such conditions where being an individual is simply impossible. Survival as an individual is impossible. Survival means surviving as your tribe, and your tribe is extremely valuable and important to you. It's your whole life. It's your whole identity. It trumps everything else. It trumps your own personal satisfaction of your ego needs and your desire to play video games or to watch a movie or to have sex. All of those are subordinate to the survival of your tribe, because if your tribe dies out, nothing else is possible in many parts of the world. See, but then in the most developed parts of the world, we've sort of outgrown the tribe. Our tribe has become so big that we forget that we're even part of a tribe and that humans are a tribal species. And this leads to all sort of absurdities, which I talk about in my Why Libertarianism is Nonsense episode. Go check that out if you want to understand at a deeper level the problems that happen there. So the essence of purple is that life, not only is it communal, but it's deeply mystical in the sense that it feels like life is part of this being alive within an enchanted magical village. So there's this element of spirituality, of mysticism that's part of Stage Turquoise. Because at Stage Turquoise, there is not advanced rationality, there is not advanced science or advanced technology, so there's not this mechanistic, materialistic worldview that is so common today that, again, we also take for granted. We sort of take for granted this idea that, well, everybody, since the dawn of human civilization, has just assumed that there are physical objects and that the universe is just this physical, logical, clockwork machine. It's like a computer. It's like a computer simulation or something like that. And this is just not the case. At Stage Purple, life is magical. Life is mystical. Stage Purple seeks harmony with nature's power. There's a sort of reverence of the power of nature because people who live at Stage Turquoise, they generally live very close to nature. They're not living in apartment complexes or high rises in giant cities. They're living in the forest, in the jungle, on the savanna, in the desert. And their survival depends upon the water, the earth, the fish, the animals, the sun, the moon, and so on. There's an animistic spirituality, shamanistic spirituality. It's mystical. We'll talk more about that as we go forward, what that really means, this notion of animism. Purple obeys the desires of mystical spirit beings, which are just thought to be part of nature. Nature is seen to be mystical. There's a deep connection to nature, and there's a sort of uncivilized, and I'm putting this in quotes, uncivilized quality to stage purple. Now, in many ways, stage purple has more wisdom and is more advanced, in a certain sense, we could say, than stage orange, which is extremely materialistic and disconnected from nature and the wisdom of nature. But in a certain sense, also, we don't want to romanticize stage purple tribes too much, because there's a reason that mankind grew out of stage turquoise or stage purple tribes, is because they are uncivilized. And we'll talk about those uncivilized aspects as we go forward here. So when does stage purple emerge? Really, the beginning of Homo sapiens. There was never a time in the history of Homo sapiens where we lived as individuals. I remember when I was a kid, I sort of thought that that's how mankind used to live. I thought that, well, we were all just individuals living by ourselves. And then as we became more advanced, we kind of came together and we started to cooperate together and, build pyramids and build cities and things like that. But before that, we were just individuals. And then later, when I did deeper study, I was surprised and shocked to learn that, no, there was never such a time. There was never a time when human beings were rugged individuals living in forests by themselves. We were always part of a tribe. And if you look at our nearest ancestors, the chimpanzees and the bonobos, you see that they don't survive by themselves. You never find a lone chimp walking through the forest. The chimp is always part of a troop. It might be 20 members, 30 members, 50 or 100 members, depending on the species of the primate and so forth. It tends to vary. But there was never this time when humans even lived as an individual family. You might say, well, the smallest unit of humanity is just a family of 4. No, you can't survive as a family of 4 in the harsh wilderness of the jungle or the savanna or in the deserts or in the mountains. It doesn't work. It never worked. So what happened was that our nearest common ancestor with these apes and primates was something like between, you might say, like a chimpanzee and a human. And even back then, this was like maybe 1 million years ago or so, even back then, they were already highly social, highly communal creatures, and they didn't survive by themselves. And also, so that's sort of collectively where stage purple emerged. It basically emerged probably 1 million years ago or so. Even before our species existed, it basically emerged. We can see a sort of a crude proto-form of it in chimpanzees, and in bonobos. They have a certain very primitive culture. They even have tool use and other things like that they learn and teach each other and so on. But individually for humans, in early childhood, we're raised a little bit isolated. If we're children, the first few years we spend mostly at home, but then they throw us into kindergarten, into preschool, and then quickly elementary school, and then quickly you're learned and sort of socialized and taught how to be tribal, how to play in a tribe with other kids, how to get along, how to share things, and all the challenges that come with that. So you remember what it was like to learn. And that's difficult. It can be difficult to learn how to integrate with other human beings and to navigate the dynamics there. There's a certain kind of game that, a social game that's played. You have to be polite. You have to be able to read their signals, their emotions. You don't want to be too mean to them. You don't want to be too much of a bully. You got to make friends. There's a sort of a politics game that's going on now. So all of these social dynamics, you start learning this really young as a child. You start learning what to say. You start learning that you need to do the right things to fit in so other kids don't ostracize you, so they don't ridicule you and laugh at you, they don't bully you. And so then that whole thing, and then it keeps evolving beyond that through middle school, then into high school. High school becomes very much social and about playing these politics games of who's the coolest kid in school and how do you be cool, how do you hang out with the cool kids, and there's different groups and all these social dynamics. So this is where stage purple starts to emerge for you as an individual. Think back into your early childhood and teenage years where you struggled with that. And I'm willing to bet that many of you struggled with that and still struggle with it today, especially if you're an introvert like me. So purple emerges because social life goes way beyond personal survival. Purple emerges because it's a natural extension of the family unit. So if we take the family unit as just sort of the basic unit of human survival, but we expand that because you're not surviving as one family, it's a collection, a clan of families surviving together that you're going to have to interbreed with and so forth. And so basically the tribe is one big family. So you have your little local family that you deal with. Now just apply those similar dynamics, scale them up by a factor of 10 or 20, and now you're looking at your tribe. In this tribe, everybody knows everybody else. It's not this cold, calculating, business-like transaction where you are trying to profit from somebody else in your tribe. It's much more like your family. Like in your family, think about it. When your mom or your dad needs something from you, they don't call you and arrange some formal get-together where you pencil them in. They don't call your secretary and set up an appointment, and then you ask them for, you send your mom a bill for seeing you, for doing some favor for her. No, it's like she needs some favor done, you do it. And then when you need something from her, maybe she does it. And so everybody helps everybody out. That's how a family works. Well, that's how a tribe works as well. And because the tribe is relatively small, it might be 20 members, 50 members, 100 members. Even at 100 members, this is still a small enough number that you're able to know everybody in the tribe by name. And so there's not that sense of alienation and anonymity which exists today if you're living in a big city where you hardly know anybody. You probably don't even know your neighbors, let alone somebody across town. Yet in this tribe, you knew everybody. You knew their business, you know their strengths and weaknesses, you know their faults and problems. There's a lot of gossiping going on. There's not much privacy. Everybody sees everybody else. Everybody's nose and is in everybody's business. And the reason it is that way is because it's like a team. It's almost like a sports team. Because we got to survive together. We got to coordinate. We got to communicate. We got to go on hunts together. We've got to organize our division of labor. Who's going to be doing the hunting? Who's going to be doing the gathering? Who's going to be doing the laundry? Who's going to be doing the cooking? Who's going to be sewing the clothes and all these sorts of things? We got to organize this. People have different roles, and usually these roles are very fixed at stage purple. And cooperation becomes extremely necessary for us to survive, as it is for apes. That's why chimpanzees live in groups, because that's how they survive. Through cooperation, they're able to survive much easier than they would as just individuals walking around looking for scraps of food to find. As a tribe, we can hunt together. We can share new inventions that we come up with. And we can develop a culture, and all these things become very powerful, especially later on as we develop even further. So here's a list of values for stage purple. Now, values is the core of the stage. Values is really what spiral dynamics is modeling in a sense. So here's the value set for purple. Purple values the tribe and the clan and the community above all else. Family and tribal bonds are deeply valued. Blood relationships are valued. Living together and contribution to the tribe is extremely valuable and important. Group activities and group celebration, group hunts, group ceremonies, group rituals. Many things are done as a group, and the meaning of life comes from being part of this tribe and part of this group. So you don't want to let your group down. You're trying to do what you can to contribute. And in a sense, this adds an extra layer to survival, because if you were just living by yourself in the forest, life would be very minimalistic and sparse. There wouldn't be much you can do. You couldn't do a lot of group activities. There wouldn't be, a dance you could do with somebody else, or a party you could go to, or some celebration that you could do. Like all of those, you wouldn't have that extra layer of meaning. It would just be you and maybe your wife or your husband and your kids, and that's it. It would be much more limited. So this gives a little extra spice to life, is that, at the end of the day, once you've done all your survival activities, you've hunted, you've foraged, you cook your food, then you can enjoy yourselves. You can do art, you can do dance, you can do drumming and music and other things like that, which adds something extra to life beyond just life as an animal. This is probably the first layer at which human life goes beyond just mere animal life, the way that like a wolf pack survives. A wolf pack, they just eat shit and have sex, and maybe they lay around, maybe they play a little bit with each other by biting each other. That's it. That's all they do. It's just very simple. And so humans were able to take it to the next level through culture and through having a larger community. Purple values honor. Purple values humility. Purple values self-sacrifice. Purple is willing to sacrifice the individual for the tribe. In fact, every individual sort of takes it as their responsibility. They don't do this begrudgingly. They are willing. They are happy to sacrifice themselves for the tribe because they believe in the tribe. This is not some burden that's imposed by some dictator from up above. This is like you being willing to sacrifice for your own family. If your mother or father was sick, would you be willing to sacrifice to work a little bit harder for them, to provide for them, to make sure they get better? Of course you would. Same for the tribe. There's an extreme importance placed upon respecting one's elders, ancestors, and customs, the customs of the tribe. And not only are there customs, there's also taboos, things that you're not supposed to do. There's a lot of emphasis placed upon ritual and ceremony. Tradition. There's a very traditional way that this tribe, your tribe, does things. There's a traditional way that we go to hunt. There's a traditional way that we cook our food. There's a traditional way that we cure diseases, which medicines we use. There's a traditional way that we dance and celebrate. There's a traditional way that we handle funerals and death of loved ones. And so everything is very traditional. There's not a lot of creativity. You're not making stuff up. There's not a lot of room for innovation here. You're just learning the rituals, the customs, and the taboos, those things you're not supposed to do, and then you're obeying those without question. And then your sense of life's meaning comes from that at stage purple. Purple values Mother Nature and harmony. Purple values magical powers, the spirit realm and spirit deities. Purple values mystery and mystical intuition, rites of passage, sacred objects and places, traditional music and dance and dress, and oftentimes there's costumes and other sorts of artifacts like maybe masks, tattoos, jewelry, and other sorts of adornments that are traditional to your tribe. Purple values myth and the sharing of stories, because this is a pre-literate culture. These are cultures that existed before there were writing systems. So they had spoken language, of course, but mostly the history of the tribe, it wasn't written down in a book because that didn't exist. It was memorized through stories and myths that were shared and passed from ancestor to ancestor and to ancestor. And to make sure those stories were kept intact and they weren't corrupted, there wasn't a lot of room for creativity and embellishment. You had to learn the stories that your ancestors told you and then try to pass them down as faithfully as you could to your children and then to their grandchildren and so on. So there's a lot of emphasis placed upon that and the history of the tribe, because it is important for us to retain a sort of a track record of where did we come from. After all, If our tribe didn't maintain a shared history through a mythology and through sharing of stories, how would you even know where you came from? You see, this actually plays a very important existential role in one's psyche. Because today we have science, modern science, that tells us that, oh, we came from, a sperm and an egg and through some genealogical record of ancestors and so forth. But this kind of science and this sort of rational materialistic explanation didn't exist thousands of years ago. And there was no historical record. You couldn't go to Google and just, look up different wars and events that happened throughout 5,000 years of human history. It was basically, you had no idea. It was deeply mysterious. Life at this stage was deeply mysterious because you didn't know how nature worked. You didn't know how the gods worked. You didn't know about science or evolution or any of these sorts of things. So it was really just you relying on your tribe's verbally shared history to give you a sense of grounding and a sense of identity of who you are and where you came from and how you're supposed to behave. And your tribe has this collective memory and these rigid rules and rituals because without these rules and rituals and traditions, you could easily do something that would kill you. You could eat the wrong plant, eat the wrong mushroom, hunt the wrong animal. And all of those things, if you do them the wrong way, they could easily kill you. And survival here is very precarious because if you eat the wrong plant and it poisons you, there's not a hospital you can go to. There's not a 911 paramedic that you could call that will come and save you. There's no medicine that will save you. So life is very fragile. And so that's why there's this emphasis on tradition, because the traditions have been time tested for hundreds and thousands of years by your ancestors, by your early ancestors. They were tested. They figured this stuff out through trial and error. Many of them died, but they figured it out. And now you are relying upon those to keep you alive. So you follow them faithfully and you respect the ancestors and the traditions. So there's a great value placed upon retaining ancestral and tribal memory because your survival literally depends upon it. It's not just kind of like, oh, wishful thinking and a nostalgia for our ancestors. No, your survival depends upon it when you're living in the wilderness. And there's no Wikipedia, there's no Google, there's no encyclopedia, there's no books. How do you know how to survive in the jungle? If we took you right now, a modern human, and we put you in the jungle, you'd be dead within a week. See, because you wouldn't know. You wouldn't have those traditions and rituals and shared ancestral memories and knowledge and wisdom of how nature worked. You would die. You wouldn't know how to find water. You wouldn't know how to find the right food and so on. There's a strong emphasis on the value of reciprocity, sharing, and cooperative interdependence. All of our lives depend upon one another. So we all have to cooperate, share, and reciprocate. There's a value of warding off evil spirits. At this stage, you believe in evil spirits. You also believe in good spirits. There's a value of cursing and hexing one's enemies. There's a value on psychic abilities and powers. There's a value on out-of-body travel, astral realms. There's a value of respect for one's elders and for their wisdom and experience. There's a value of family relics and heirlooms, religious medals, lucky charms, wards, shrines, artifacts of that nature, and sacred words. Words have magical powers because words can hex, words can be prayers and blessings, words can summon the nature spirits and ancestors. They can be used to communicate with the spirit realm. So words are not just something you find in a dictionary. Words are sacred and magical and powerful. They are used in dances and rituals and so on. Here are some more characteristics of stage purple. It's pre-industrial, usually pre-agricultural, and basically hunter-gatherer. Although, of course, stage purple is also capable of being agricultural. But generally, as humans became highly agricultural. We settled down, we became less nomadic, less hunter-gatherer, and then quickly we moved up into spiral dynamic stage red and blue. So it was agricultural, but maybe like farming on a small scale, not on a massive scale. We're talking about small cohesive groups with very tight kinship bonds. Family bonding is central. And in a sense, your tribe is your whole family, your extended family. That's how you think of the tribe. So just think of currently what we call the nuclear family in developed nations now, your mom, your dad, your siblings. Imagine that, but just expand it out to 50 people, an entire tribe. So it's sort of like a very robust family that you're a part of. And you're treating others the way that you would treat your mom, your father, or your brother, sister, cousin, grandmother, grandfather, that sort of stuff. There's a deep emotional bonding between members of the tribe, just like in a family. There's a deep sense of tribal history, as we've talked about. There's lots of implicit, unwritten rules to how this tribe works. The tribe, over centuries of survival, has developed certain rules for how they hunt, how they dance, how they celebrate, how they talk to one another, how they eat, and many other things. And so one of the challenges that Westerners face when they discover one of these new tribes, and these tribes, they still exist. There are tribes, tribal stage purple people who live in Papua New Guinea, in Africa, in South America, in the Middle East and elsewhere. And Westerners, sometimes Western scientists and anthropologists, they will go and they will try to study these tribes. One of the challenges is that a lot of these tribes have their own unique customs and implicit rules that aren't written anywhere that you have to follow in order not to offend them and in order to fit in. And so one of the challenges is that they have to go there and they have to spend years really going, full native, as they say, and living in that tribe and learning, through trial and error, learning these implicit rules. And then once they do, then you can fit into that tribe. And then you can function. But these rules, oftentimes, they're not scientific, they're not very rational. They're just sort of intuitive, and they're heuristics for survival in that particular environment. And of course, it varies from tribe to tribe because every tribe is living in a unique environment in many cases. These tribes have fixed social roles. There's the role of the chieftain, of the medicine man, of the shaman, of the hunter, of the warrior, of the fertile young bride who is sold to some man to have children, and so everybody's playing their role. There's a more communal way of raising children, where the child is not just being raised by the mother and father, but by the entire village, by the entire tribe. And so that gives a little bit of a different dynamic, and in a sense, it helps to socialize the child more so than maybe even today, because today the child probably grows up just with the mother and father for several years, and then we send him off to preschool or kindergarten, but then the child doesn't really know anybody in preschool and kindergarten. It's all strangers and foreigners, and the child doesn't really know how to deal with them. It feels strange. It doesn't feel as intimate. The bonds, because you're moving between different preschools and different kindergartens, as your parents move around, they move you around. And so there's not that deep sense of communal connection that is developed. And in a sense, that's a negative, because that later produces sort of socially crippled, awkward humans, which are not able to work well in teams. So, there's pros and cons to that. There's a sense of communal property at stage purple. So it's not just my house. Basically, my house is part of the village. And of course, it can be considered my house, but in a certain sense, it's the entire village's house, and we cooperate and collaborate, and we share our resources, our food, our property, to to maximize efficiency. There's no strong sense of property rights. There's no strong sense of individual rights. There's no sense of profit motive where I'm trying to like set up a stall or a business and I try to profit as much as I can from you the way that we do today. Sharing is a necessity for survival in this sort of environment. And so this creates a sort of a natural insurance policy. The insurance policy is that if I have a little surplus supply of food, I'll share it with you. If you, for example, go on a hunt and you're not able to find any animals today, or you're not able to fish, you have a bad fishing day, hey, I'll share some of my surplus with you and your family. You can come to my house and eat my food. And then next week when I have a bad fishing day, you'll share some of your fish with me. And in this way, we survive. It's a natural insurance policy. There's usually a gender-based division of labor. Women do the cooking maybe, or they do the sowing, or they do the gathering of the plants, whereas the men go on the hunt and they do the defense, they man the defensive perimeter and other things like that. There's a emphasis on the protection of fertile women because, of course, the woman plays the central role of reproducing the tribe. And usually in these sorts of tribal cultures, women have many, many children, over 5 children, 10 children, like a lot of children, because these children usually don't survive. Probably half those children will die soon after birth, simply from lack of sanitation or diseases or lack of food or whatever. And so the woman has many, many children, and only a few of them end up surviving, which is actually very similar to how many animals breed. They have many children, only a few of them survive to adulthood. There's a prioritization of social bonding versus business schedules. So one of the challenges that Westerners face in dealing with stage purple societies and cultures, and for example, don't think that stage purple is only literally limited to tribes in the Amazon, which are totally isolated from the West. No, you're going to encounter stage purple culture, for example, in the Middle East, in India, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Hawaii, in many other parts of the world, in South America, right? Even outside of the deep, deep, deep Amazon, you're still going to find it in cities. You can still find it in villages and rural areas. So don't think that it's only confined to super isolated tribes. That would be just, that would be solid purple. But you can get examples of purple, which is still part of modern society to a certain degree. And in these cases, as a Westerner, you might, for example, go to India, or you might go to Hawaii, or you might go to Indonesia or wherever, or to the Middle East. And, you try to run a business deal with these people. And it doesn't really work. Because, you as a sort of a Western business person, you want them to show up on time and to do X amount of labor at X amount of time, this many hours in a week, and then get the job done, build the house by X date. That's how we Westerners are sort of programmed to think. But in these purple cultures, they don't have rigorous schedules. If the neighbors are throwing a party, they're not going to go do your business and build your house. They're going to go join the celebration of the party because there's a marriage, a wedding, whatever, some ceremony that's happening. They're going to go do that because social bonds are prioritized over any kind of business productivity. And so usually these purple cultures, they're not very productive materially because that's just not something they really value very much. It's not about how much money you can earn. It's not about working 14 hours a day to get ahead, to buy a better car, buy a better house. These things don't exist. Really, the most valuable thing when you're living in this kind of tribal, simple culture, because there's not a lot of material goods. You're not going to buy a latest video game, or you're not going to go to the strip club. There's not much to do other than social bonding. That's probably the most valuable thing in your life at this stage, rather than any kind of material objects. So one of the challenges with stage purple is that it's so deeply tribal that there's an intense in-group, out-group dynamic, us versus them, which leads to tribal warfare, blood feuds, potentially ethnic cleansing and racial violence. Because even though there's a very deep social and emotional bond between this little tribe, which is seen as your own personal family, what happens when another tribe interacts and intersects with your tribe? They're going to be seen as foreigners because they have different traditions, different values, different culture, different ancestry, different myths, different stories. How are you going to make those two mesh together? This creates a very serious problem, which ultimately will lead to the necessity of higher stages of the spiral. Because while stage purple seems to work well as a little group, it does work well. But what happens is these little groups, they don't just stay little groups. They grow, they balloon, they take up more resources, more of the environment, and there's more of these groups. They start popping up everywhere on the planet, and then pretty soon they start to interact with one another, and then, of course, that's when you get tribal conflict, especially because every group is so beholden to its own traditions. It's very, very inflexible. So therefore, what happens is that, one group is rigid about its traditions, as is the other group, and then they're both closed-minded, they're both rigid, they're both traditional, but the traditions, they clash, so the two groups will clash because they can't understand each other's traditions. They can't see the relativity of each other's traditions. That comes much further up the spiral. These purple cultures tend to have a natural attitude towards sex. Sex is not seen as bad or dirty. It's not repressed the way that it is at stage blue. So that's why you see women who are half naked or even fully naked in these National Geographic documentaries in these tribes. People are just very comfortable with their sexuality. The repression of sexuality comes at stage blue with the advent of orthodox religion and the sort of discipline that comes there and the sort of sense of morality, which tends to want to repress sex. So this is prior to that. Most of the labor that is done in these cultures tends to be manual labor. Arranged marriages are very common. The selling of daughters is very common. Women, young women, usually when they're only 12 years old or 15 years old, are sold off by the father and the mother to the highest bidder, who can pay a high dowry for the woman. The more beautiful the woman, the more reproductive value the woman has, the higher the dowry will be. And she doesn't have any choice about this. So it's both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. These cultures tend to have a preference for boys over girls because survival is difficult. And when survival is difficult, the boys tend to be physically stronger and a little bit better at survival than the girls. And because of this, that's why the girls are sold off oftentimes and demand a dowry, because that dowry is sort of the extra payment that the parents get for nurturing and raising this girl because she was weaker than the boy. But to compensate, because she has reproductive value, then she gets payment from the boys who grew up who are going to marry the girls. That's how it tends to work. Nepotism tends to be a strong characteristic of purple because it's so family-oriented. If you get a stage purple group of people trying to form a business or a government, what's going to start to happen is they're going to naturally start to put their own family members, even when they're not qualified, into positions of power because blood bonds are more important than competence many times in these cultures, and that can create a problem. These cultures tend to be polygamous. They tend to have naturally emerging leaders based on seniority and experience. So the chieftain in one of these tribes will tend to be old, very experienced, survived many battles, went on many hunts, has a lot of wisdom. And you can see how valuable that is because, in our modern culture, we can go to some university professor at Harvard, and they are sort of like our repository of wisdom, or we can go to Google and we can go to Wikipedia and we can get, information that is contained in books and from other humans who have lived 100 years ago. We can pick up a book by Einstein, or we can pick up a book by Isaac Newton, these sort of towering intellectual figures who are our wise men today. But you don't have that in a pre-literate society. So literally, it's the most experienced person who's still alive. And so there's a lot of value placed upon the elderly in these cultures, which is less true today in our developed societies, where we tend to discount the elderly as feeble and not young and useless, and we lock them in nursing homes. That's not the case here. The chieftain is interesting. The chieftain is not a dictator. You might think the chieftain is a stage red authoritarian mafia figure. No, that's not how it works. At stage purple, the chieftain is not an absolute ruler. He's there to selflessly serve the tribe. He's very experienced. He's usually competent and wise, and he facilitates and guides, provides wisdom to the tribe. He's not in it for personal gain, to build his own personal mafia and to gain the most wealth and to suck everybody dry who's underneath him. It's not a very authoritative hierarchical structure. It's not a pyramid structure. It's a loose distributed sort of hierarchy, and the chief is going to be on a close, emotionally bonded basis with all of the other people that he's dealing with. So it's not going to be a case where he has a bunch of lieutenants and a bunch of layers where he doesn't even know who's in the bottom of the hierarchy. The chief will be intimately connected with all of his sort of followers, we might say. There's a very strong emphasis placed upon individuals being willing to sacrifice for the tribe. Sacrifice self for the tribe, because competitive individualists put the tribe in danger. If you're part of this tribe and you just want to do your own thing, that's not going to work. You need to be a team player. See? Because if you're off doing your own thing, that could put everybody else at risk. At stage purple, there's a serious concern with natural phenomenon. Stars, the sun, water, rain, lightning, seasons, plants, earthquakes, sky, fire, earth, mountains. Because this is the environment you live in. All these things are life and death for you, are important. You need to study the stars. You need to know when the sun is rising and setting, because that tells you when to plant the crops. You need to be able to predict the rain and tell where the lightning is and what it means, and understand the sky and the mountains, because you're navigating these mountains and you need to know where to go hunt and so forth. There's a worship and reverence of nature spirits. So oftentimes there's the sun spirit, the water spirit, the rain spirit, the plant spirit, the mountain spirit, the sky spirit, the fire spirit. This is that animistic sense of spirituality. There tends to be a magical sense of cause and effect. Things are not seen in a mechanistic, materialistic framework. Reality is not there to be quantified and formalized with mathematical equations. There is no formal science yet at this stage. So there's a mystical sense of cause and effect. For example, the shaman might do a rain dance, and then that is believed to cause the rain to come and to water the crops. Or if we, for example, as a tribe, we dishonored our ancestors for some reason, then that might mean that the crop season next year will be bad. There will be famine or disease will come. And because there's not enough scientific basis of understanding of cause and effect, stage purple can get away with the sort of magical thinking, because there's just not that scientific basis and evidence. We're not doing double-blind, placebo-controlled studies here on how diseases work. We don't know where diseases come from at this stage. We don't even know, for example, where lightning comes from. We don't really know how to explain it. We don't know where earthquakes come from, other than from the, angry earth spirits. We don't really understand what fire is. What is fire? It's, the fire spirit. We don't know that fire comes from some sort of chemical reaction. We don't know what chemicals are. We don't know what atoms or molecules are. We don't know what electricity is. We don't know even what weather is. We don't even really know what the earth is. Like, all this stuff is deeply mysterious and unknown, so it seems magical. And we can start to draw causes and effects which are superstitious or fallacious. And so superstition tends to run rampant in purple cultures. And that's why they have various kinds of traditions and taboos. If you break the taboo, then superstition says that, you see a black cat, and then that means that something bad will happen. Or, you break a mirror, and now you violated some spiritual law, and then because of this, something else will happen to you, and so on. Stage purple tends to be more right-brained than left-brained. It tends to be more intuitive and feeling-oriented, body-oriented, heart-centered, rather than logical, rational, scientific. Emotional attachment is placed on places and things and people, and these become important. And the reason it works this way is because you're using your intuition basically at this stage to navigate through life and through reality. Because there's not a writing system. You can't carefully document and codify and formalize everything. There's not mathematics and science and strict logical axioms and syllogisms that you do in order to understand the world. You're operating on gut instinct. And you'd be surprised how far you can get with that. And in fact, stage purple people who are very experienced, like shaman and medicine men and wise men, basically, they can be very keen with their senses. They can be extremely perceptive because they live, like, for example, been living in the jungle for 50 years, going on hunts and doing whatever they do, and they've become very, very attuned to how to track animals, how to see, footprints in the leaves, how to look at weather patterns, predict when lightning is going to come, when rain is going to come. They can learn to hear different, sounds of birds, and based on the sound of the bird they hear, they can tell whether it's the springtime or the fall or something's going to happen, because they become very, very sensitive through intuition and through feeling, and this allows them to survive much better than logic. All the logic in the world is not going to help you to survive if we throw you into the middle of the Amazon. You need keen perception, subtle distinctions between all the different natural phenomenon that exists there, which comes with massive experience. And that stuff is better handled by intuition than by the logical mind. The logical mind is more about analyzing and categorizing things, which is good for science, for scientific purposes. It's good if you're writing a book. It's good if you're a university professor, but it's not so good when it's a matter of survival in the jungle. Stage purple tends to blur the lines between reality and imagination. There's not such a clear distinction, which is where this animistic spirituality comes from. Stage purple tends to confuse fables with scientific facts. These are not distinguished carefully. Good and evil spirits must be kept in balance. And there's usually a multiplicity of spirits. So stage purple is not monotheistic, but polytheistic. There's a sort of a marketplace of different spirits that you have to appease and work with. And it creates for sort of a rich and interesting mythology and mysticism, because you're not just praying to one god. There's all sorts of interesting, conflicting, different spirits, and usually they have They have good ones, they have bad ones, they have petty ones that have their own, sort of mischievous characters, and then you can find these sorts of figures all throughout mythology. Nature and objects tend to have a life force and intentionality of their own. This is that notion of animistic spirituality. Trees have spirits. In fact, that particular tree might have a particular spirit because that's like an ancient oak tree that our ancestors worshipped. And it has a particular spirit, has a particular name, which is different from that other tree over there, who our enemies worship. That's the evil tree over there. It has an evil spirit and an evil name, whereas ours is good. The stars, they watch over us at night. The rivers, they give us life, and they feed our crops. And if we anger the river will stop flowing, and our crops will die. Or the river will overflow, and it'll flood our crops, and then we will starve. So we must appease the river by giving it, sacrifices, by praying to it, by performing rituals and ceremonies for the river, making sacrifices to it. The mountains are inhabited. It's this sort of animistic spirituality. Ordinary events are often seen as having mystical signs. If a bird flies over the head, it's not just a bird, it's a crow. And a crow means that our enemies are coming because the crow was flying from east to west. Our enemies are in the east. So that's what that means. And so on. There's a lot of these sorts of mystical signs that purple reads into reality. Of course, a lot of this is projection of the mind, but purple doesn't recognize that. It's a pre-literature culture, but it's rich in folk stories, songs, drawings, dances, artwork, crafts, and elaborate customs. So they compensate for their lack of writing with these other forms of art and culture, which can get very sophisticated and beautiful and worth admiring. And in fact, that's a lot of what anthropology does, is it travels the world, collects the stories and songs and drawings and artwork and dances and writings, and not writings, but like artifacts is the word I was looking for, the artifacts of these various cultures. And then we can put those in museums. We can marvel at them. Some of them are beautiful. Some of them are weird and foreign or hideous and just strange. It tends to have vivid myths, legends, and parables. Spirits are seen everywhere. This is where the notion of sprites and pixies and elves and gnomes and trolls and magical creatures comes from. And basically every culture, European culture, Russian culture, Chinese culture, Japanese culture, Polynesian culture, all these cultures have their own sort of, if you go into their folk stories, it has stories of mystical creatures who are often mischievous, tricksters, have agendas of their own, have personalities of their own, who people are sort of forced to deal with, to reckon with, to appease, or to fight and battle against. This is a very common theme. Totems, charms, curses, and hexes, witchcraft and shamanism, sorcery, white magic, black magic, fertility symbols, omens, spells, sacred herbs, and plant medicine. All of this is characteristic of purple. Purple tends to have not a linear but a cyclical sense of time, because their time very much is connected to the movement of the sun and the stars, the seasons, and the zodiac signs. So all of that tends to be very cyclical rather than linear. They don't understand evolution the way that we do in the West, in modern culture. And of course, this sort of purple animistic spirituality, as you should see, is the early origin points of all the major religions, of Christianity, Islam, of of Buddhism, even, and of Judaism, and every major religion today. It all originated from these polytheistic, animistic, spiritual, mystical traditions, which then later got systematized and became very orthodox. And then many of the sort of black magic elements and so forth were stripped from them. The mysticism was stripped out of them. And then it just became this monolithic, monotheistic religion. And you can see, especially in Christianity, for example, how almost all of Christianity, as Orthodox Christians consider it today, has been stolen from earlier pagan cultures. Perhaps the most obvious example is the birthday of Jesus. Jesus is born on the 25th, which corresponds with the winter solstice, which was an important point in the whole solar cycle for these hunter-gatherer tribes, because when you're farming the land, you need to know when winter is coming and when winter is going to end. That point at 25th of December is basically sort of the peak of winter. After that, it starts to go towards spring, and then based on that, that's sort of the life and birth cycle of every season of the crops. And so your survival was completely tied to that. So you have this sort of cyclical sense of time. So many of the traditions and customs that are part of Christianity or Islam today, or part of Judaism, this was all actually coming from Stage Purple. For example, the injunction not to eat pork was something that would come, or shellfish, that exists within Judaism and exists within Islam today. Where did this come from? It came from purple pagan customs and traditions, because that was just part of how they survived back then. There were certain foods you're not supposed to eat because they could rot faster, they could cause diseases that can't be cured, and so forth. So a lot of these got carried over. Many of these purple cultures are seen today to be sort of peaceful and easygoing. And the reason that is because when you're living in an isolated tribe somewhere in the middle of the Amazon, life is easy in the sense that there's not a lot of competition. You're secluded. Your only competition is just with the animals that you're trying to hunt, basically, and maybe one or two nearby tribes. And you're not competing very much with people in your own tribe because it's a low-scale system with only 50 or 100 members. All of you are like one family, so there's no sense to compete. And you guys have a low impact on the environment due to your small scale. The problem is that we tend to romanticize this, and we say, oh, well, that was the good life back then. That's the kind of life we need to return to today. And this is extremely naive, because that kind of life is only peaceful and it only works when we're talking about 50 or 100 people. It doesn't work when you scale it up to 1 million or to 100 million or to 1 billion people. 1 billion Chinese can't live that way today. 350 million Americans can't live that way today. We have nuclear weapons. We have jumbo jet airplanes. We have tanks and missiles and rocket launchers and grenades and flamethrowers and automobiles and trains and cars and God knows what else we have. All of this complex stuff that can't work at that kind of low scale. And because we've got millions and billions of people, of course now the environmental impact is major. So although it might seem like, well, our ancient ancestors, they were so environmentally friendly. They were so environmentally conscious. Well, in a sense they were, because they were living so close to nature, they had to be. It was part of their survival. Today we're more disconnected. We're living in giant cities, in concrete jungles. So we are more disconnected in that sense. But also in a certain sense, they don't overestimate how environmentally conscious they really were, because they didn't need to be very environmentally conscious, because they were just so small in scale relative to the environment they lived in that they simply couldn't pollute it all. They didn't really need to worry about their pollution and their coal-fired power plants and dumping toxic chemicals in the river because they didn't have these things. So actually, true environmental consciousness only evolves at the high level of stage green. If true environmental consciousness existed at purple, that means it would also exist at red and at blue and at orange, but it doesn't. See, so that means it didn't really exist there to begin with. It existed in a sort of primitive level, but it didn't exist in the true sort of deeper systemic understanding of how our actions create all sorts of collateral damage to the environment with modern technology. So it's easy to be environmentally friendly when you don't have any advanced technology like advanced chemicals and plastics and oil refineries and uranium extraction, so forth. Then it's easy to be environmentally friendly because all you're using is wood and plants and all this stuff is biodegradable. So of course, yeah, it's easy. But the trick is to develop an environmental consciousness once we do have all that advanced technology, and that requires getting to stage green and beyond. At stage purple, culture is taken completely for granted. And these people are unconscious about their culture. They don't even have the notion of a culture because the culture that they are living in is their way of life. It is their reality. It's not culture, it's reality for them. And it takes many stages to get to a point where you start to see culture as something that's socially constructed and something that could be otherwise, something that we could change. Stage purple has no idea that culture is something that we can consciously manipulate and that culture can be counterproductive. Culture can be destructive. Culture can be a form of brainwashing. Stage purple doesn't understand any of this because its culture was something that was created unconsciously as part of its survival activity for hundreds of years by its ancestors, and there was no reflection. There's no reflection at stage purple about its culture. There's no sort of sitting down and then wondering like, well, is it proper? Is it rational that we perform this rain dance every time we need rain for our crops? Is that rational? Is that scientific? There's no self-reflection like that. There's no sense of wondering like, but what is the cause and effect relationship between my rain dance? How does my rain dance cause the rain to fall and to grow the crops? No, we don't think of it that way at stage purple. And we also don't think of alternatives. So we might say, well, in our tribe, we perform the rain dance this way, and in that tribe, they perform the rain dance the opposite way. Well, maybe their way is better than our way. No, our way is the only way. It's the right way. Their way is the evil way. We don't understand their way. We only understand our way because our way came from our ancestors and we value our ancestors. We don't value their ancestors. See, so now we start to get into some of the challenges of stage purple is that it doesn't really handle diversity and alternative worldviews and alternative belief systems and alternative cultures and rituals and ways of doing things very well. And this quickly becomes a problem once the isolated bubble of this tribe is punctured and we start to interact with other tribes. Once we get more trade, once we get conflict with other tribes, this creates a problem because now we're exposed to new perspectives and new worldviews, but we're so traditional and so closed-minded and so rigid in our ways of doing things that we don't know how to deal with it. And we tend to deal with it quite poorly, which leads to conflict and battle and death and an inability to adapt. So there's an attachment to rigid traditional ways of living, and it's difficult for stage purple to imagine other alternatives for living or other ways that you could look at the world. It tends to be a very limited, blindered, paradigm-locked worldview. And there's an inability to adapt to changing life conditions. That's probably the ultimate downfall of stage purple, is because they're so rigid, their worldview is so limited and narrow that as soon as their environment changes, if it ever does, and it hasn't for hundreds and thousands of years probably, those tribes that were living in the Amazon, that are still living in the Amazon today, they've been living there for like 10,000 years, and their environment has not changed. But the problem is that today the environment is changing. Today, the climate is changing. The rainforests are being burned down. There's new types of food and crops. There's new diseases. There's new technology. There's jumbo jet airplanes flying overhead. Imagine living in a tribe in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, and then you see a jumbo jet airplane flying overhead as you're going on your hunt. How do you make sense of it? What is that? Is that an evil spirit? Is that God? Are those aliens? What do you do about it? First of all, it's frightening because you don't have any control over it. You also don't understand what the hell it is. But then also, it's not just frightening in the sense that, oh, you're paranoid and it's just sort of unknown what it is, but it can be frightening, like literally that airplane could fly over you and, dust some chemicals on you, and those chemicals could be toxic, could kill your whole tribe. So it's not a sustainable way to live because the rest of the world is evolving very rapidly, modernizing with technology and so forth. And if you don't keep up with that, you can't just keep living in your isolated bubble forever. And that ends up sort of being the downfall of purple. All right, now we're at my favorite part, which is the list of examples. Here are all the purple examples that I came up with. And I came up with some of them. Some of them I grabbed from the Spiral Dynamics book. So here it is. Carlos Castaneda's Don Juan and all of the Carlos Castaneda books. These are brilliant books, amazing books filled with a lot of ancient wisdom. Go read these books. If you haven't, there's like 10 of them or more. So if you have read the Don Juan Carlos Castaneda books, and you've sort of marveled at the wisdom there, and you've also marveled at the sort of worldview that Don Juan has. Don Juan has this very animistic worldview where, again, he's reading signs. A crow flies over his head, and he's attributing all sorts of mystical things to that crow. And you start to wonder, like, how could he believe these things? Well, because he's from stage purple. In a certain sense, he's kind of naive. You get that? But in a certain sense, he's very wise. So yeah, it's both at the same time. It's primitive and naive, but also there is deep mystical wisdom there to be found in these cultures. And that's actually a lot of what Stage Green is doing today. Stage Green is sort of looking back because it's reacting against the materialism of Stage Orange, just kind of looking backwards at our ancestors and wondering, like, well, when did we live in harmony with nature? That's sort of like what the hippies are doing. They're looking back and they're saying, yeah, we need to go back to our ancient roots, to our tribal sort of communal way of living and draw inspiration from that. And so therefore there's a reevaluation of the value of shamanism and psychedelics and plant medicines and organic farming and agriculture, sustainable agriculture and drum circles and all this sorts of hippie stuff. And that's sort of where the Carlos Castaneda books fit in historically. They arose after the 1960s counterculture revolution. They became extremely popular, sold millions of copies, because after the 1960s psychedelic revolution, people were looking for that sort of tribal wisdom, which the Carlos Castaneda books fed very well, and they sold extremely well. Other examples, the Amazon tribes, African tribes, Indonesian tribes, the tribes of Papua New Guinea, the Native Americans, of course, all the various tribes, the Comanches and the Lakota and there's so many of them, the Apache and dozens of them. Many tribes still exist in the Middle East, in the rural parts of the Middle East, especially in places like Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, in Syria, Uzbekistan, and so forth. A lot of tribal cultures there still. In Bosnia, In Africa, the Zulu, the Bwiti. Hawaiian culture. The original Hawaiian culture is very much purple, with the Hawaiian chiefs, the kahunas, and various kinds of Hawaiian ceremonies and so forth. They tend to be a very kind of traditional, tribal, those leis that they put up on you when you arrive in Hawaii with the flower garlands and all the ceremonies. They have the ceremonial food and cookouts and so forth, and luau's, is that what they're called? Anyways, yeah, so Hawaii. Indian culture. There's a lot of tribal, stage purple stuff going on in India still today. A lot of Indian spirituality is very tribalistic. There's like 100 different languages spoken throughout India. Every tribe has their own little language, which sort of shows you the limitations of stage purple. Because, see, one of the problems in India is that they can't even get their shit together where they can just speak one common language. I mean, they speak English because the British sort of forced it upon them. But if the British didn't come and force English upon them, like the Indians, they don't all speak Hindi. They have like different dialects and subdialects and all these different subcultures all throughout India. And so they're very fragmented. See, for India to be able to rise to sort of a modern level, to become a first world country, first, one of the things it has to do is it has to pick like one language that everybody is taught at school, and it has to get rid of all the other languages. But of course, every tribe is going to complain about that because everybody wants their one language to be the best one, and they don't want to get rid of their traditional culture, which is based in their language and so forth. And so, they're not well unified. And the problem with having 100 different languages is that it creates unnecessary friction and barriers for commerce, for business, for culture, and so forth. You know, if you're going to create a movie, what language is it going to be in? You can't create a movie in 100 different languages. It has to be in one language. So this slows them down. And they have all sorts of really weird, arcane spiritual traditions in India. I mean beyond just yoga and beyond the kind of basic stuff that we understand as Westerners here. Like there's a lot of very weird spiritual shit going on in India. If you go there, you could probably spend a whole lifetime exploring it all. And a lot of it will be based on herbal medicine and psychedelics or weird like black magic, witchcraft, voodoo type of stuff. They have that going on there. So very fascinating, but also strange and foreign. Arab culture also has some of that going on. The Japanese Shinto religion is a stage purple in its origins. It's actually separate and distinct from Buddhism. So most Japanese subscribe to Buddhism, but also to Japanese Shinto. And Japanese Shinto is very ritualistic. And it all revolves around the worship of kami, 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 which is sort of their word for God, but it's not this monotheistic God. It's more like the spirit, the life spirit that pervades all of nature. Really similar to what is called the Force in Star Wars. It's this sort of disembodied notion of God, which is actually true. That's the most accurate form of God. That's what God is. God is the Force. God is kami, if you really become conscious of it. It's also you, but they don't understand that probably. What else do we have? Tibet, a lot of Tibetan spiritualities, stage purple. In rural China, they have a lot of stage purple spirituality still. The Aborigines in Australia, super stage purple. That's like the purple prototype. Also the Maori Aborigines in New Zealand, also the same. Pocahontas. Shaman. Shaman is actually a term that comes from Siberia, I believe. The Siberian shaman. But now we've adopted that term to refer to all sorts of different cultures. We talk about shaman in South America and so on, but originally it was the Siberian shaman. The medicine man. In Avatar, the movie Avatar, James Cameron's Avatar, those blue cat-looking creatures, the Na'vi, They're a great example of stage purple. They're basically kind of a ripoff of the Native Americans. Legend of Zelda is a good video game example because in Legend of Zelda, the whole appeal of that game is it's kind of set in this animistic, spiritual, mystical world, which basically is kind of like, I assume where like Japanese Shinto religion came from. So I think that Legend of Zelda probably draws a lot upon the Shinto tradition with its shrines and various kinds of water and fire spirits and so on. So that's very much Shinto. Stage purple. And it gives you that kind of vibe when you're playing it. It's just sort of this magical, mysterious world with artifacts and different races and different people. A lot of times the people are half animal, half human. That's also very common, sort of those Egyptian gods like that. Patapon, one of my favorite games of all time. If you played it on the PSP, Patapon is amazing. It's a solid purple game. It's all about controlling this group of little tribal guys who go and fight war against other tribes and defeat creatures. And it's a rhythm game. It's actually quite challenging to play it, but also very rewarding. Turok, the Dinosaur Hunter. You play that on the N64. It's kind of a stage purple. Dances with Wolves with Kevin Costner, that movie. The Medicine Man, the movie with Sean Connery. Gives you sort of an intimate look at stage purple. He's sort of a white Western guy living in the middle of the Amazon rainforest with these natives, and he's looking for a cure for cancer. It's a great movie. Go check it out. It's an early 90s movie. They don't make them that way anymore. The whole notion of sort of the noble savage refers to stage purple. Various kinds of ancient mythologies. If you study mythology through the works of Joseph Campbell and so on, that's all about stage purple. Voodoo is purple. Witchcraft tends to be purple. Curses and hexes, animal sacrifice tends to be purple. The gift economy is a purple idea. This gift economy, for example, is used in Burning Man and various kinds of burns that are held around the world. So if you participate in burns or go to Burning Man, a lot of the vibe and values behind Burning Man, it's spiral-dynamic stage green, but also it borrows from stage purple as well. The sharing of resources, paganism is purple. Those cannibal tribes that we hear about, I don't know if that's actually a real thing or just a Western stereotype, but that would be purple if it was real. Sun worship, animal gods and spirits, the idea that animals have a spirit of their own and a life force of their own. This is a very pagan sort of idea, which is kind of anti-stage blue Christianity, which doesn't believe that animals have souls. And basically at stage blue, humans tend to treat animals as just personal property, which is not the case at stage purple. Ethnic cleansing is a purple sort of force. The Paleolithic, cave paintings like you see at Lascaux, France, and other places in Spain and elsewhere in Europe. Stonehenge, those large monuments that are found around the world, different kinds of stone circles. Ubuntu. Ubuntu is not a piece of software. Ubuntu actually means, in African, it means, I don't know which part of Africa it's from, but it means, I am because we are. Ubuntu, I am because we are. That's how it's literally translated. So it's sort of like, we are all one tribe. It's that idea. Suicide bombing is actually also a stage purple sort of dynamic because, and that's one of the things we as Westerners don't really fathom very well is, how could people in the Middle East involve themselves in suicide bombing? It seems so irrational to kill yourself. But it's not irrational when you consider that many people who engage in suicide bombing, they are pulled from sort of Middle Eastern, very underdeveloped parts of the Middle East, where it's still stage purple, very tribal, very clannish. And the culture there, The value system there is that you sacrifice for your tribe. So if you see your tribe is getting exterminated or treated unfairly, then you will gladly strap a bomb to your chest and blow yourself up in the defense of your tribe. So suicide bombing is sort of a hijacking of that stage purple sacrifice self for one's tribe value system, hijacking it, combining it with sort of a toxic stage red as well, and then kind of weaponizing it. Same thing with kamikaze pilots in World War II. That was also sort of a very self-sacrificing force that was part of Japanese culture. Human sacrifice is stage purple. Eating one's enemies, that's sort of, I guess it's a trope where you will defeat your enemy and then cut out his heart and then eat his beating heart. That might be purple. Chanting and drum music, herbal medicine, Ayurveda from India, acupuncture, chi energy from Asia, shrines, totem poles, ayahuasca ceremonies, peyote ceremonies. Salvia divinorum was used by Mexican shaman for their divining purposes in witchcraft. Magic mushrooms is also used by Mexicans, by Mexican shaman as part of their ceremonies. Datura is also used that way. Iboga is used by the Bwiti African tribes in similar ways and as a rite of passage for their young men. I don't know about the women, but the men for sure. Amanita muscaria mushrooms, which were used by the Siberian original shaman. Sweat lodges, vision quests, tribal tattoos. Take a look at the tattoos that the Maori of New Zealand paint on them. If you've ever taken magic mushrooms and you look at yourself in the mirror, you will see those sort of Maori pattern tattoos on your face and on your body. It's quite cool. The notion of the evil eye, magical healers, ancient burial grounds, knocking on wood, that old superstition, the lucky rabbit's foot, black cats, prayer altars, the Day of the Dead, Halloween, urban legends, fertility goddesses, astrology, fortune cookies. Now, of course, I'm not saying that fortune cookies existed 5,000 years ago. I'm just saying that fortune cookies are sort of a holdover, this sort of superstitious holdover that we keep today. And in Asian cultures, you find this because there's a lot of purple still in Asian cultures. For example, in Japan, you will find the, that cat that you see at Japanese restaurants. It's called actually the maneki neko. It's this golden cat with this paw, and the paw usually kind of moves back and forth like this. It's sort of like a good luck charm, similar to a lucky rabbit's foot. This is popular. And in Asia, all throughout Asia, they have all sorts of little statues and lucky charms and stuff like that, which kind of comes from this purple tradition. That's also, I think, where the fortune cookies come from originally, something like that. Don't think that purple stuff needs to have an origin all the way back thousands of years ago. Purple stuff still gets sort of like invented and reinvented today. So like the maneki neko, I don't think that's something that goes back thousands of years. It's probably only 100 years old or something, or 200 years old, but it's still purple. Folk tales and fairy tales are great examples of purple. Graffiti, gypsies, face paint, symbolic costumes and ceremonial dress, secret handshakes, mating ceremonies. I remember reading about the most astounding and odd mating ceremony from the Philippines. I don't know if they still do this today, but supposedly they did this. So in the Philippines, like a couple hundred years ago or even further back, they had this mating and marriage ceremony where basically the male would have his penis pierced with some sort of like, almost like a bone, like a sharp bone or something. It went perpendicular into the penis like this. Don't ask me why they do it this way. So they stick this sort of bone or toothpick through the penis and it stays there. Then the way that it works is that he gets married, and then, they have the honeymoon. He has a honeymoon with his wife, and they like, I think they might even tie a rope around the penis, around this bone through the penis. Then they move the bone like this so that you can insert it into the vagina. They insert it into the vagina, then the bone sort of goes horizontal like this, and it gets stuck in there, literally lodged in there. And they're supposed to mate for like 24 hours straight. And they can't pull it out because it's too painful. It gets stuck in there. And so they're supposed to do this very slow. It's not a fast pumping mating the way that we have sex in Western culture. It's this very slow, methodical, like joining together. It's just kind of like this spiritual, ritual, marriage mating thing that they did in the Philippines. And I don't know exactly how they got it out afterwards. Somehow they did. But so this is what they did. So stuff like this. Circumcision, I imagine, originally also came from this sort of stage purple mating ceremony thing. Dowries, blood oaths, communal eating, missionaries going to tribes. Now, of course, missionaries are stage blue, but when missionaries go to tribes and interact with tribal cultures and try to convert them, they're converting the stage purple heathens. Burial rituals, burial grounds. Also, small company work environments. So if you're doing a little startup and you're just starting a little team of 10 people working together in a garage somewhere, that's going to have, even though it's a modern invention, it's not something from thousands of years ago, it's going to have that sort of tribal, communal, stage purple dynamic to it. It's going to feel like an extended family. You're going to know everybody, and you're going to work that way. The notion of the sacred tree of life, the circle of life from The Lion King, very stage purple. Don Miguel Ruiz in his popular books, The Four Agreements and others that he's written, a lot of that wisdom is sort of ancient Olmec, Mexican shaman type of wisdom. The book The Alchemist has a very stage purpley type of vibe to it. And I shot an episode called Aztec Non-Duality, where I talk about teotl and the Nahua notion of spirituality and how it's very non-dual. If you like that episode, I mean, I pulled that from a sort of a purple source, which is the sort of Nahua notions of spirituality and teotl. So you can see that episode shows you that there's a lot of profound, effective, and practical wisdom to be found within these purple mystical spiritual traditions. It's not just all bullshit and fairy tales and magical thinking. There's some serious, deep, profound spiritual wisdom there. So it's correct that when you get to stage green, spiral dynamic stage green, you will look back at purple and you will reappreciate what's there. You will go and mine for it. And from that, you can get stuff like neo-shamanism, the resurgence of psychedelics, new discoveries of old spiritual texts and scriptures, and you can find meaning and value from those. I think that episode that I did of Aztec Non-Duality, go watch it. It's one of my best episodes. I mean, it's got some really powerful spiritual insight in it. And I was amazed when I found that material and that information, because I thought that, non-duality was this modern, advanced, thing. And then it's amazing to look back and to see that, like, no, our ancestors from thousands of years ago had it all already figured out. You just got to go and look. So those are some examples. Here are some sayings that exemplify stage purple. All for one and one for all. Don't say it or it might come true. You'll jinx us. Blood is thicker than water. This is how we do things around here. There's no place like home. We must honor our ancestors. That would upset the spirits if we did that. So we can't do that. We are all part of Mother Nature, or the Great Spirit. Now, what triggers stage purple? Not showing respect to tradition, elders, ancestors, and spirits. That's a huge no-no. That'll probably get you killed. Lack of bonding and reciprocity, not being a team player, trying to do your own thing, or acting like some libertarian individual. This will quickly trigger them because this is extremely selfish. It's rude because it puts the entire tribe in jeopardy. Arrogance, ambition, selfishness, and greed. Purple is very sensitive to this. The sort of arrogance you might get if you get like a Wall Street CEO or Wall Street trader who maybe goes on some ayahuasca retreat in the Amazon, in Brazil, or in Peru or someplace. And, he walks in there, he's all arrogant. He thinks he understands the world, and he doesn't take all the ceremony seriously. He doesn't take their sort of mystical visions and shamanism seriously. He thinks it's just all a joke. That kind of attitude of arrogance. And he's just throwing money around. He thinks he can just like bribe the shaman because he's got a bunch of money. But the shaman can't be bribed because the shaman's not interested in money. The shaman's interested in spiritual wisdom. But the Wall Street guy, he's stage orange. That doesn't compute for him. And likewise, the shaman will get offended if you try to bribe him with money. You might want to pay some extra money to get a nicer room, a nicer ceremony for yourself. The shaman doesn't want this. The shaman wants to keep things traditional. The shaman wants to do it the way it's been done for thousands of years. Another thing that triggers purple is innovation, new ideas, progress, and changing things. Purple wants to keep doing things the way the ancestors have always done them. He's not interested in evolution and innovation. And of course, this ends up being his downfall because culture is evolving, society is evolving, technology is evolving, so you can't just not innovate. You can't just keep doing the same old shit all the time. But purple is stuck on that. What else might trigger purple is other cultures and other tribes who have different customs and different ways of doing things and different worldviews which conflict with his own. He can't wrap his mind around them. He can't understand them. It's confusing. And it might threaten their existing ways of doing things. They might see it as corruption. Maybe there's a better way to do the ayahuasca ceremony. Maybe, like, for example, I might go to an ayahuasca ceremony in Peru and I might try to show them something like 5-MeO-DMT in its pure synthetic form. But the shaman will say, oh, no, that's not the traditional way. That's not good. That's inferior. But is it really inferior? Maybe it's actually superior. Maybe it's superior to actually get a vape pen with pure freebase DMT rather than trying to get it from some ayahuasca vine. It's going to be better. It's going to be more potent. I can guarantee you synthetic psychedelics are more potent and better and more spiritual than anything you can get from some ayahuasca vine or from some magic mushroom that grows in the forest. It's going to be better. I've tried both. The synthetic is better. But a lot of these shaman type people, they don't want to listen to that because they don't want something new. They don't want something better. They want the old way of doing it. Another thing that could trigger purple is domination, exploitation, profit motive, strict schedules, and strict productivity. This desire just for materialism, to produce as much as possible, to work as hard as possible. This sort of workaholic attitude that we have in the West, this will probably upset them very much because it's dehumanizing. It breaks human bonds for the sake of what? Some material productivity? That doesn't mean much to purple. They'd rather have their bonds. Now, what are some downsides and unhealthy aspects of purple? Well, of course, tribalism is probably the biggest one. When people are deeply tribal, this ultimately will devolve into tribal warfare, blood feuds, ethnic cleansing, and genocide in the worst case scenarios. And we see this around the world. It also has the downside of being extremely isolated and tends to be fearful of outsiders. Like I said, it tends to have a narrow worldview, which limits its ability to adapt, which is a huge downside. Maybe this is the biggest downside of purple, is that it simply isn't able to adapt. Like many of the Native Americans, when the Westerners came over here to America, many of the Native Americans died out because they weren't able to adapt. They weren't willing to modernize. They weren't willing to adopt the technology and the advances of Western culture. And so they got pushed off onto reservations, and now they live miserable lives on these reservations. And in a sense, I mean, of course, it was a genocide by white Europeans against the natives. So, of course, the white Europeans are to blame in a sense for that. But also, in another sense, they're not to blame because the nature of life is constant evolution. Everything is evolving. Everything is advancing. You can't put technology back in the bottle. You have to work with the new technology that is available. And you have to be able to integrate multiple cultures because the globe is one interconnected system. We can't have little bubbles of societies and cultures living completely isolated from each other because they're afraid of each other and because they don't want to integrate what the others have developed. That's just not going to work. So, really what the Native Americans should have done is they should have integrated with the Westerners. Then they would have been more successful. But if they just insist on being traditional and living by their old customs, well, those old customs are not going to be able to survive against the industrialized, modern, Western technological machine that is society with its giant populations and its cars and planes and trains and all of this stuff. It's just not going to survive. And many of those, Native Americans who are still living on these reservations, they have it really bad because they don't have a sense of purpose anymore. Their natural habitat, they've been relocated from those, or it's been destroyed. And many of them are now just alcoholics. They're out of work. High crime rates in these reservation communities. They don't have a sense of purpose. They don't have a sense of community. Don't have a sense of connection. So really, they need to be reintegrated into the West, but a lot of them don't want to. So they sort of are damned if they do and damned if they don't. That's exactly what happens when you sort of stay a dinosaur and you don't evolve. Other excesses of purple is that it tends to be overly traditional and conservative. Sort of ties into what I just said. It tends to be overly superstitious, too much magical thinking versus rational thinking. There is value to mysticism, but there's also value to being rational and practical and material at times. Sometimes you just need to have simple, rational, material plans and goals. And you got to be pragmatic sometimes. Another downside of purple is that it can be fearful of natural phenomenon. It can overly mystify natural phenomenon, treat it as though it's not understandable through science, which a lot of it is. And it can be too slow to adapt technology, or it can resist technology or reject technology, which is a shame. And I see that even within the spiritual community. For example, I talk about awakening and enlightenment, and then when I bring up psychedelics as a new technology that has been invented in the last 60 or 70 years, psychedelics are very new in the sense of, modern chemical synthetic psychedelics. That's very new. The ability to extract, find new molecules, and then to use the exact molecules that are the best for each type of, work that you're trying to do, whether it's trying to access God or trying to heal some childhood trauma wound or whatever, or work on your relationships or whatever. There's different molecules that are good for different things. But when I talk about it like this, people who are like into the old school awakening, they criticize me by saying that, oh, Leo, but this is a drug and it's not real awakening because it's a drug. Well, that's what I mean by this sort of rejection of technology. You're not actually thinking for yourself of the potential that this technology can offer us. Why do we need to resist a technology if it's able to produce enlightenment in 15 minutes? Why not make use of that technology? Why meditate for 10 years when you could do it faster? Now, of course, I'm not saying there's no value to meditation, but those people who completely reject psychedelics, like a lot of yogis will reject psychedelics, but it's clear to me that they've never even tried it. Or if they have, they tried some inferior psychedelic. And so they're judging all psychedelics based on one, bad tab of LSD that they took or something. And so they're not fully appreciating the power of this technology and how it could transform the world. See, they just want to be, strict yogis. They have a particular yogic system, and yoga is, of course, comes from Stage Purple originally. And there's all these different yogic systems. There's hundreds of different yogic systems. They all have their own dogmas, their own rituals, their own ways of doing yoga. Each one says that they're the best and that they're the only correct method of doing yoga. But of course, that can't possibly be true because there's lots of yogis who have used lots of these different systems to become awake. And yet none of them are communicating with each other. None of them are integrating each other. And so this is part of the problem of purple. Purple can be very gossipy. Another problem of purple is that it only tends to work at small scales. When you get into the millions of people, purple doesn't work. It breaks down. And ultimately, it's just not innovative enough. It's not creative enough. It's not progressive enough. And it's not adaptable enough to work in the modern world. And that's why purple is quickly dying off. But also, there's a lot of valuable stuff there that we need to mine before it all dies off. So that's that. Here are some statistics on purple. About 10% of the adult global population we could put at Stage Purple, but it only has about 1% of the world influence. So very little influence on the world, simply because it's so outdated, so archaic, and so out of touch with modern times and modern technology. So it's been left in the dust. Purple is sort of like the dinosaur stage. It's like the crocodile of the animal kingdom. The style of government of purple is small-scale communism, basically. This is true communism, is the way that the natives live in the middle of the Amazon. It's the way that the Native American tribes lived before the Westerners came over from Europe. There's no formal legal system. There's no court system. There's no laws, at least not officially. There's no formal market. There's no military. There's no taxation. It's all very distributed. It's loose. It's based on custom. There's a council of elders, usually, who run the tribe or a group of tribes and coordinate things. But it's not autocratic. It's not dictatorial. It's not about power-hungry monarchs. These elders are usually well-respected, and they serve the tribe selflessly. There's a sort of a Burning Man gift economy that we've talked about. And the chief usually distributes goods based on the needs of the people in the tribe. So it's not about climbing some sort of ladder and becoming the wealthiest and richest and most powerful, as billionaires and millionaires love to do today. It's about who needs what, and that's how resources are distributed. So again, Stage Green socialists and Marxists today, they sort of look back at Stage Purple fondly, and they try to take examples of this gift economy and this sort of communal way of living, and they try to scale it up, and they sort of ask the question, well, how can we turn the globe into this sort of gift-based economy? How can we distribute the resources of the world on a per-need basis? Because they see the limitations and the toxic effects of Stage Orange run amok, of capitalism run amok. And so Stage Green is trying to figure out how to do that, but also that's difficult to do because it doesn't scale so well. It works well when you have 100 people or 1,000 people, but it's difficult to do when you have 100 million people or 1 billion people. So those are new challenges that we need to invent new solutions for that we haven't figured out yet as a species. Here are the top lessons that you need to learn from Stage Purple. So you might be wondering, well, Leo, I'm already stage orange, or I'm already stage green or yellow. So why do I even need to listen to stage purple? What's the point? What do I get out of it? It seems so archaic. But remember, you were already sort of raised into a culture that's orange or green based on where you grew up in a modern culture, modern society. It's very easy for you to have skipped over and to have gaping holes in your development from the lower stages like red and purple. So it is worth going back and looking at the lower stages and seeing what are the things you might have missed and not fully integrated or fully developed or have insufficient experience with. Maybe something that you've turned into a shadow. So here are some of these things. Building intimate social bonds and learning how to socialize and being comfortable with socialization. This is something that I think a lot of people struggle with today because of the internet, because we're very alienated. We were bullied in school. We didn't get properly socialized for whatever reasons. And so we developed a chip on our shoulders, and we have a shadow, and we have social anxiety, and we're not sure how to socialize. And this hurts us in many ways. First of all, it's not fulfilling because socialization is just fulfilling. Knowing how to socialize is fulfilling. It helps you to get friends. It helps you to get wives and girlfriends and husbands. If you're struggling to get laid, many incels are struggling with this. They simply don't know how to socialize. It's not that women don't want to sleep with you. It's not that you're not hot looking enough. It's not that you don't have a sharp enough Brad Pitt looking chin or something like that, the way that incels like to whine about. The fundamental problem that incels have is that you're so alienated. You spend so much time playing video games on the internet. You spend so much time watching anime and being on these toxic incel forums, masturbating about how women don't like you, that you don't actually spend any time socializing with women face to face. That's your biggest problem. If you want to get laid, you need to start socializing. And many of these incels, they didn't learn how to socialize properly when they were younger for whatever reasons. And so now they suffer from that. See, if you grew up in a proper, purple, healthy culture, you would have learned these things by the time you were a teen, and your life would be a lot more fulfilling, and you'd be a lot less suicidal, and you'd be a lot less depressed and all that. Another lesson you can learn is that humans are a deeply communal species. So those of you who are stage orange libertarian types and think that you are this rugged individual and that you can live life all by yourself, and that this is how mankind is supposed to live, property rights and all that. Well, you didn't really learn the lessons of purple. You got to go back and learn that if you're a libertarian. Then you can start to appreciate what it really means to be a human, and you can see yourself as part of a larger global phenomenon that's happening, a larger society and community, and you realize that to be part of a community means making sacrifices. It can't just be all about you. It's not just all about what you want and what you need. It's also about what you're willing to contribute to your society. What kind of sacrifices are you willing to make? See, then you wouldn't have these silly views of taxation being theft. You would see that taxation is something that is necessary and actually good for the benefit of your community. That would be much more healthy. You can also learn the lesson of caring for the entire community and treating the entire human species basically as a family of yours. Rather than treating other humans as strangers or aliens or illegals or other races that are inferior, that have lower IQs and all this kind of nonsense that is so common these days in the conservative right. Rather than that approach, you can start to see that we're all in the same boat. We're all together. We're all part of Earth. We're all part of the greater spirit of Gaia. And all of our actions collectively add up to what our community is doing. And that really what we should be doing is building a global community. Multiracial, multi-ethnic. Imagine if you treated every race, every ethnicity, every gender every sexual orientation as though they were your family members. With that same love and kindness, without demonizing them, without making them scapegoats, without blaming them, and trying to distribute resources fairly amongst all of them. See, wouldn't that be something? Another lesson of Purple is life beyond individual profit. Many of us are so lost in this trap of materialism and chasing profit at the expense of everything else. What if life, though, is about the quality of your social bonds more than the material possessions that you lust after? Another lesson of Purple is the value of nature, living more organically, more harmoniously with nature, just being out in nature more, going for hikes, and communing with Mother Earth, so to speak. Go to the deserts, go to the mountains, go to the forests, go to the jungle. Appreciate that. There's a spiritual quality of just being out in nature, which a lot of us are disconnected from. Again, those incels who are on these forums who just keep writing these troll comments about how women don't like them and how they're depressed and want to kill themselves. When was the last time you were out in the forest, listening to the birds, looking at the sun, looking at the stars, without all the light pollution of your city? Probably not in years. You would feel a lot better about yourself if you did that. And you would feel even better if you did that with some friends and as part of a group, as part of a party. Maybe go camping with your friends if you have some. But of course you probably don't, because you live in your mother's basement watching anime and jerking off to fucking porn and stuff. Another thing you can learn from Purple is to connect more with your emotions and intuition versus your logic. Another thing I noticed with these incels is that they're so logical. Everything is about science and facts and all this, facts over feelings, this sort of nonsense. But actually the quality of your life is much more contingent upon the quality of your emotions and your intuition rather than your logic. And even to be able to talk to girls, to be able to attract girls, to date girls, you need to become much more emotional and intuitive rather than logical and stuck in your mind. Living from your body and your heart rather than your head. And psychedelics can help you to open up your heart and to get in touch with your body and out of your head. Speaking of psychedelics, that's another huge thing we can glean from stage Purple. Ayahuasca, mushrooms, peyote, combo, Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and others, salvia, datura, although I don't recommend you try that one. That's dangerous. But there's a lot of herbal medicines and psychedelics and so forth that we can rediscover, and we can modernize. We can turn these into modern technologies for deep healing and personal development. Amazing stuff. And you can also take from Purple the importance of spirituality, mysticism, and psychic powers. This is not just bullshit. It's not just wishful, magical thinking. There's something very profound to spirituality and mysticism. Psychic powers are real, and you can develop them to various degrees. Start taking that seriously as a possibility and start to pursue that stuff, and you will see the quality of your life improves as you go away from chasing material pleasures and being stuck in survival and getting into being mode. Another thing you can take from Purple is simply slowing down your life, being rather than doing, living a simpler life, minimizing your life, getting rid of all the unnecessary distractions and stuff, spending less time online, spending more time spiritually connected to nature and to people. You can also glean from Purple the wisdom of the elders. Also, the wisdom that is baked into ancient traditions. Ancient traditions aren't just always stupid and silly. There can be deep wisdom in them. Don't take that for granted. Listen to your elders. Seek out that wisdom of the elders and then actually build your life upon it, and you'll see how much better it is than whatever else you're doing right now. And lastly, what you can glean from purple is a natural, wholesome, organic diet. People sometimes ridicule this whole organic foods movement as though like, oh, organic, oh, that's some sort of elitist luxury thing. But you know what? All of your stage purple ancestors, they lived on organic food their entire lives. And that's why they didn't have much cancer or heart disease or all the other modern conditions, depression and ADHD and erectile dysfunction disorders and premature ejaculation and acne and eczema and autoimmune disorders. A lot of this stuff comes from the kind of toxic diets that we eat. Our ancestors ate high-quality, organic, grass-fed food. So adopt some of that, and then you're going to start to feel better, and then you're going to start to live better. How do you transcend stage purple? Well, I assume that very few of you who are watching are actually stuck in solid stage purple. You've already transcended it, basically. But just for sake of comprehensiveness, if you are stuck in purple, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to develop a sense of personal ambition, which is going to lead you into red. Remember, red comes after purple. You're going to have to let go of tradition, question tradition, and let go of your ancestors, question your ancestors, and be willing to go out into the world and to expose yourself to more of the world. Especially today, there are so many different cultures and tribes that you can experience. So go start to open your mind to those, experience more of the world, which will break down the narrow confines of your old traditions and perspectives. Be willing to abandon old traditions. And also let go of that magical thinking and start to think more rationally, more strategically, and more scientifically. Study some Western philosophy and so forth. And through that, you will ascend into red and then beyond. So in conclusion, remember that stage purple is not good or bad. It is fairly primitive by today's standards, but also I hope you can see here that there's a lot of amazing stuff from purple that is worth your time studying and reading about. There are many great books that I recommend, some on my book list and more that I'll add in the future. There's many great videos that I've shared and will continue to share on my forum and on my blog of different stage purple cultures and traditions that I think are valuable for you to study on your personal growth journey and in your spiritual work as well. If you're doing spirituality, there's a lot of spiritual wisdom that you can find within these purple cultures. And you can find many great documentaries today about it that are available on YouTube and elsewhere. So remember that purple has both healthy and unhealthy manifestations. What we're really interested in is understanding the unhealthy manifestations and avoiding those, and then taking the healthy manifestations and integrating those into our lives and then benefiting from those. Remember that if you're stuck in purple, you'll have to evolve through red before you can go higher. You can't just skip red and jump straight to blue or green. So it is what it is. So go through red and then blue and all the way up the spiral. All right, that's it. I'm done here. Please click that like button for me and come check out Actualized.org. That's my website. There you will find my blog. You will find the Life Purpose course. You will find the book list with some good books that will introduce you to purple. You'll find resources on spiral dynamics on my book list, stuff that I haven't shared through the public free videos. So check that out. Come to the forum. And on the forum, you will find, of course, threads, we call them mega threads, for every stage of the spiral, where we give tons of examples, dozens and hundreds of examples, videos, images, quotes, and so forth, so you can really learn spiral dynamics through these examples. That's one of the best ways to learn it, is through these examples. So you'll find a link down below to the forum. Come check it out. You don't even need to sign up to see the examples. Look for the megathreads. You will see a stage purple megathread. You'll see a stage red and blue and green and everything up above that. You can support me on Patreon by going to patreon.com/actualized and chip in $5 a month. That helps to support the funding of this work and future work that I have planned for you guys. And the last thing I'll say here, this is me wrapping up the spiral dynamics series, but also in a sense not, because there's still a lot more to say about spiral dynamics, and I'm going to be covering topics on developmental psychology, which will be closely related to spiral dynamics. I will still be doing more future videos on spiral dynamics. Now that I've got an episode on each stage, you understand the entire model if you watch all these episodes. But still, you're going to struggle fully integrating them and fully seeing how to get the practical consequences, how to apply the model in the real world, how to apply the model to politics, to society, to culture, how to apply the model individually in your own life to grow. So I will be probably doing more episodes in the future with a focus on application and like the really practical benefits of this model, now that I assume most of you following me will be well familiar by having watched these episodes. So make sure you stick around for those, and make sure that you take the time to integrate the lower stages. I think a lot of people today, simply because our culture is roughly orange-green in most parts of the world that are watching me, orange and green we take for granted, but the lower stage is like purple, red, and blue. I think that a lot of you guys are missing that as part of your foundation. You're missing the self-discipline and work ethic of blue. You're missing the assertiveness and courage of red. You're missing the connection to nature and to community, that communal mindset of purple, the ability to socialize effortlessly and naturally. You're missing that from purple. And probably you're missing a lot more than that. But those, I would say, are probably three major things that many of you guys are missing and that you're suffering from. And that's why you can't get laid. That's why you can't get a husband. That's why you're like a doormat. People keep walking over you and abusing you because you're not assertive enough from stage red. And that's why you struggle to hold a job and to pay your bills, because you don't have enough self-discipline. Or that's why you struggle with your life purpose, because you can't discipline yourself enough to work every day, or to meditate every day, or to go to the gym every day, and that's why you're fat. Or you struggle to eat healthy foods, and that's why you're fat, or whatever. You see, every stage builds upon the previous one, and you need that foundation. I get a sense that a lot of folks that are following me now, because my newest content is so advanced, it's so metaphysical and abstract and spiritual and so forth, you're jumping the gun too much. You need to spend a good 5-10 years just building a solid foundation for yourself with stages purple, red, blue, and orange. Be able to survive, be able to navigate your way in the world, be able to be effective, be able to be assertive, to have courage, to have discipline, to have a work ethic, to get your material needs met in a healthy way. Avoid all the toxic elements of all these stages. And then we can start to talk about enlightenment and awakening and an advanced spiritual metaphysical stuff. See? So just make sure you get your priorities straight. I should not be your only source of self-improvement advice. I should be one of your sources. I am like a meta source. I am probably one of the most advanced sources you will ever find, a source that integrates so much stuff. I am like the umbrella in your plan, but then you need all the smaller stuff underneath. I don't spend that much of my time giving you super practical dating advice or super practical business advice or super practical financial advice or super practical, nutrition advice. You can find other YouTubers and courses and books on that stuff. One person can't do it all. I don't have enough time and energy to do it all anyways. So I focus my attention on really the big stuff to give you the big picture, the thing that ties everything together. That's the most valuable thing I can offer you. That's my forte. And then you will still need to go and find individual experts who can help you with the other stuff. You see, it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of material. It's a lot of work. But also don't treat this as a chore. Don't treat this also as something you have to accomplish in the next year or 5 years. We're talking about the rest of your life, right? I'm giving you a development plan for the rest of your life. There's going to be more than one lifetime of work here for you to do. Don't treat it as work, though. Do this because you're excited about it. Do this because what else is there to do in life? I mean, what are you going to do in life? You're here to be alive and to live the best life possible, to grow yourself in every way possible, to optimize your life in different ways, nutritionally, fitness-wise, psychologically, emotionally, socially, politically, spiritually, and so on, right? So you're optimizing all these different areas. And for that, you need a big overarching plan and a vision of where you're going and why you're doing it. Why would you do this stuff unless you saw, some light at the end of the tunnel? So I'm here to sort of give you that light at the end of the tunnel and to inspire you to see the full potential of this work. See? Because when I started out reading about self-help and self-improvement, I didn't know what the full potential of the work is. Nobody told me. That's very rare. Nobody ever tells you the full potential of it. So that's one of the roles that I serve. Is I try to just show you how much there is here. There's so much here. And all of this that we're talking about is really just your own potential. All I'm ever talking about is your own potential. This is your true potential as a human being. It's enormous. It's astounding how much potential you have of what you can become and of the role you can play in the world. If you really get your shit together and you stop being lazy and you develop some self-discipline and you start to take your life seriously and you start to treat it like a project that you're working on and you treat it like a work of art and you make your life a gift that you give to the rest of the world because you're part of a larger global community, of a larger global tribe. You see, so I'm the one who's helping you to interconnect the dots to create that vision, which will be the fuel that then allows you to get all the rest of your ducks in a row. And there's still so much more work we have to cover there. We're not even close to done with that project. So stay with me for more, because there's still a lot more that we haven't covered.